The silence at table 4 was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and meticulously curated. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an execution, hanging in the air amidst the clatter of silver forks against fine china and the low, ambient hum of Portland's most exclusive Italian bistro, *L'Orangerie*. I sat with my back straight, a posture drilled into me by governesses in Vienna and etiquette coaches in Geneva, long before I ever set foot in Oregon. Across from me sat Brandon, the man I had spent 2 years loving, and to his right, his mother, Patricia. The Saturday afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the rim of the crystal water glasses. It should have been a beautiful lunch. It was the anniversary of the day we met. But the air tasted of metal and impending ruin. I knew this feeling. I had grown up in boardrooms and gala halls where fortunes were decimated with a whisper. I just never thought I would find that specific frequency of tension at a lunch with my fiancé. "The risotto is undercooked," Patricia announced, pushing her plate away with a grimace that wrinkled her perfectly powdered nose. She looked at me, her eyes cold and blue like glacial ice. "Though I suppose you wouldn't notice, Alina. I imagine the standards for Italian cuisine in, wherever it is you are from, are quite different." "Eastern Europe, mother," Brandon corrected her, though his voice lacked any real defense. He was staring at his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid, refusing to meet my eyes. "Alina is from Eastern Europe." "Right," Patricia said, waving a hand adorned with a diamond that was large, loud, and frankly, of mediocre clarity. "Somewhere near the war zones, isn't it? It must be such a relief for you to be here, in civilization." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. "The risotto is actually perfect, Patricia," I said, my voice steady, retaining the slight, melodic accent that Brandon used to tell me was exotic, but now seemed to irritate him. "And my home is quite civilized. We have opera houses older than this entire country." Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "Charming. Defensiveness is such a distinct trait of the working class." I felt the familiar sting, the one I had endured for 2 years. To them, I was Alina, the struggling event planner's assistant, the immigrant girl Brandon had rescued, the woman who lived in a small apartment and drove a used Honda. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the Honda was a choice, a test of character that I had hoped Brandon would pass. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the inheritance that sat in trust funds in Zurich, or the shipping empire my father controlled. I looked at Brandon, waiting for him to speak, to bridge the gap, to squeeze my hand. Instead, he cleared his throat. It was a dry, nervous sound. "Alina," he said, finally looking up. His handsome face, the one I had fallen for, looked strained. But beneath the anxiety, I saw something else. Resolution. "We need to talk." "I thought we were talking," I said softly. "No," he said. "I mean, we need to talk about the wedding, about us." The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. The clinking of cutlery faded into a dull roar in my ears. "My mother and I have been discussing our future," Brandon continued, glancing at Patricia for support. She nodded, leaning back in her chair with the satisfaction of a cat watching a mouse trapped in a corner. "And I've realized that this isn't going to work." I placed my hands in my lap, intertwining my fingers to stop them from trembling. "What isn't going to work, Brandon?" "Us," he said, his voice gaining a little more strength now that he had started. "The marriage, the engagement, all of it." "I don't understand," I said, though a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. "We just sent out the save the dates last week. We chose the florist on Tuesday." "That was a mistake," Brandon said quickly. "Look, Alina, you're a great girl, you really are, but I'm at a crucial point in my career. I'm up for the vice president role next quarter. I need a partner who fits." "Fits," I repeated. "Someone who understands the culture," Patricia interjected, unable to help herself. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Someone who can host a dinner party for senators without needing a translator for the menu. someone with connections. Brandon needs a wife who is an asset, Alina, not a liability. The word hung in the air. Liability. I speak 4 languages, Patricia, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. I have a degree in international economics. I think I can handle a dinner menu. It's not just about that, Brandon snapped, his patience fraying. It's about compatibility. Look, I've reconnected with Rebecca. The name hit me harder than the insults. Rebecca, the daughter of the CEO of the pharmaceutical company Brandon worked for. I had seen her at company parties, blonde, loud, aggressively American, and heir to a fortune that Brandon clearly coveted. I see, I said, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a merger. Brandon was trading up, or at least he thought he was. So, this is about your promotion. It's about my life, Alina, Brandon said, raising his voice. A few heads turned in our direction. He didn't seem to care. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the audience. He was the protagonist of his own drama, the sensible man making a hard choice for his future. I need someone who belongs in my world, and let's be honest, you've always been a bit of a charity case. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Charity case. I thought of the times I had cooked for him when he was sick, the times I had proofread his reports, the times I had listened to him complain about his boss for hours. I loved you, Brandon, I said quietly. It was the only admission of pain I would allow myself. Love doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in the hills, Patricia scoffed. She reached into her designer handbag, a tacky monogrammed thing, and pulled out a thick white envelope. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped just inches from my water glass. What is this? I asked, looking at the envelope as if it were contaminated. It's $5,000, Patricia said, her voice dripping with benevolence. Cash. Consider it a severance package. It's enough for a one-way ticket back to wherever, Bulgaria, Romania, and enough to get you set up for a month or 2 until you find a local boy to marry. I stared at the envelope. Then I looked at Brandon. He was studying the tablecloth, looking anywhere but at me. He knew about this. He had agreed to this. They weren't just breaking my heart, they were trying to buy my disappearance. They wanted me gone, wiped from the narrative so Brandon could rewrite his history with Rebecca. You think, I started, my voice trembling slightly before I clamped down on the emotion with an iron will, that you can pay me to leave. We're trying to be generous, Alina, Brandon said, finally looking at me. His eyes were hard. Take the money, don't make a scene. You don't have the resources to fight this. You barely make rent on that apartment, just go home. Your visa is tied to our engagement, isn't it? It's going to expire anyway. It was a lie. My visa was an O1, granted for individuals with extraordinary ability in business, independent of any man. But I had never told him that. I had let him believe I needed him. The humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging. I could feel the eyes of the other patrons. The couple at the next table had stopped eating. The waiter was hovering uncertainly near the wine station. They saw a poor immigrant girl being discarded by a wealthy American family. They saw a tragedy. But as I looked at Brandon, really looked at him, the tragedy dissolved. I saw his cheap suit, which he thought was high-end. I saw his mother's desperate need to project status because she lacked true class. I saw their smallness. They were small people playing a small game. And suddenly the grief vanished. It was replaced by something cold, sharp, and incredibly clear. Imperfect, my father's voice echoed in my mind. Emotion is a luxury of the poor, Alina. Rulers observe. I took a deep breath. I unclasped my hands. I sat back in the chair, my spine aligning against the wood. The energy at the table shifted. Brandon frowned, sensing the change. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected me to grab the money and run, or to throw the water in his face. I did none of those things. I reached out, my manicure perfect, my hand steady, and placed 2 fingers on the envelope. I slid it back across the table slowly, until it rested in front of Patricia. Keep it, I said. My voice was no longer the soft, accommodating voice of the fiancé. It was the voice of the boardroom. It was the voice of the Volkov legacy. You'll need it for the wedding. I hear polyester flower arrangements are expensive this time of year. Patricia's mouth fell open. Excuse me. I ignored her. I looked at Brandon. I didn't look at him with anger. I looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bacteria sample. You are right, Brandon, I said. We are not compatible. I value loyalty and integrity. You value optics. You're being delusional, Brandon scoffed, though he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. You're broke, Alina. Don't play high and mighty. I didn't answer. I simply reached into my purse. It was a vintage leather bag, unassuming to the untrained eye, but worth more than Patricia's car. I pulled out my wallet. Waiter, I called out. I didn't raise my voice, but the tone commanded immediate attention. The head waiter, a man named Marco who had been watching the exchange with a furrowed brow, rushed over. Yes, Signorina. The bill, please, I said. Alina, stop it, Brandon hissed. You can't afford this place. The lunch is $300. Don't embarrass yourself further. I insist, I said, keeping my eyes on Marco. Marco placed the leather check folder on the table. Brandon reached for it, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps to maintain his dominance, but I was faster. I placed my hand over the folder. Then I opened my wallet and pulled out a single card. It wasn't a debit card. It wasn't a standard credit card. It was a card made of black anodized titanium. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and devoid of numbers on the front. Just the intricate, laser-etched design of a lion and my name, Elena Volkov **. It was an invitation-only card from the Sovereign Bank of Geneva. There were perhaps 50 people in the United States who held one. The limit on the card did not exist. I placed the black metal card on the check tray. The sound it made against the leather was distinct, a solid, heavy thud that sounded nothing like plastic. Brandon stared at the card. He frowned. He didn't recognize it. What is that? Some kind of prepaid gift card. But Marco recognized it. I watched the color drain from the waiter's face. His eyes widened, his posture stiffened, and he looked from the card to me with a sudden, dawning realization. He had served politicians and celebrities, but he knew what this card meant. It meant wealth that whispered, old money that owned the building we were sitting in. Signorina Volkov, Marco stammered, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the tray with both hands, treating it like a holy relic. I had no idea. It is an honor. Thank you, Marco, I said, offering him a small, gracious smile, the kind I never gave to Patricia. Please add a 30% gratuity for your team. I apologize for the unpleasant atmosphere at this table. Of course, Signorina, immediately. Marco bowed, actually bowed, and retreated to the terminal as if he were carrying a bomb. Brandon and Patricia were staring at me. The silence now was different. It wasn't the silence of execution. It was the silence of confusion. What was that? Brandon asked, his voice wavering. Why did he call you Volkov? Your name is just Alina. You never asked about my surname, Brandon, I said, standing up. I smoothed the skirt of my dress. You were always too busy talking about yourself. I picked up my purse. I looked down at them one last time. They looked small. They looked like tourists in a world they thought they owned, sitting in a restaurant where the staff now respected me more than they would ever respect them. Alina, wait, Brandon said, standing up halfway. He looked at the envelope of cash still sitting on the table, then at the heavy card being swiped at the register. A crack was forming in his reality. Where did you get that card? Who are you? I didn't answer his question. I didn't owe him answers anymore. The time for explanations had passed. The time for lessons had begun. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. You wanted a woman who could help your career, Brandon. You wanted connections. You wanted power. I paused, letting the words sink in. You had it all sitting across from you at the breakfast table for 2 years, and you traded it for a promotion you're never going to get. What do you mean? He demanded, panic flaring in his eyes. Goodbye, Brandon, I said. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't look to see Marco handing me my card with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. I didn't look to see Patricia frantically asking Brandon what was happening. I didn't look to see Brandon sinking back into his chair, the realization slowly creeping up his spine that he had made a catastrophic mistake. I walked through the heavy glass doors of *L'Orangerie and out into the cool Portland air. For the first time in 2 years, I breathed. I pulled my phone from my purse. It was already buzzing with texts from Brandon, demanding explanations. I ignored them. Instead, I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. It rang once. Miss Volkov, a deep voice answered. It was Victor, my father's head of security and my personal liaison. We have been waiting for your call. I'm ready, Victor, I said, walking toward the valet stand where my beat-up Honda was waiting. I paused. Actually, scratch that. Don't bring the car around. Miss. Send the driver, I said, watching the traffic flow by, seeing my reflection in a shop window. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. And Victor, reactivate my accounts, all of them. I have a wedding to replan. A wedding, miss, but I thought. Not a wedding, I corrected myself, a cold smile touching my lips. A gala, the Volkov Foundation Charity Gala. I want it at the same venue, same date, same time as the wedding was supposed to be. Understood, and the guest list. Everyone, I said. Senators, ambassadors, the board of directors of every major pharmaceutical company in the city. Everyone Brandon wants to be. Everyone he will never be. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. The valet brought my Honda around, looking apologetic about its condition. I handed him the keys and $100 bill. Keep it, I said. Miss. Keep the car, I said. I won't be needing it anymore. A sleek, black town car with tinted windows pulled up to the curb just as the valet stood there, stunned. The back door opened. I slid into the leather interior, the scent of expensive cedar and silence enveloping me. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the window one last time. Through the glass of the restaurant, I could see Brandon arguing with the waiter, gesturing wildly at the bill, probably trying to understand why his authority had suddenly evaporated. He had wanted a show. He had wanted to humiliate me. He had no idea that he had just written the opening scene of his own destruction. I didn't feel vengeful. Revenge is messy. Revenge is loud. This would be something else. This would be education. And class was now in session. The narrative Brandon constructed in the days following our lunch at *L'Orangerie* was a masterpiece of selective fiction. It was impressive, in a way, how quickly he managed to paint himself as the benevolent martyr of a failed relationship. I didn't need to be in the room to know what he was saying. I could hear the echoes of his voice in the silence of my phone, which had ceased to ring with calls from our mutual acquaintances. To his colleagues at the pharmaceutical firm, he was the focused professional who had realized, with a heavy heart, that his fiancée simply couldn't handle the pressure of his rising career. To his mother's circle of bridge-playing socialites, I was the unstable Eastern European girl who had finally cracked, overwhelmed by the sophistication of American life, perhaps even fleeing back to the old country, in a fit of shame. He told them I had caused a scene. He told them I had thrown the money back in his face, not out of dignity, but out of hysteria. He spun a web where he was the logical, grounded hero who had narrowly escaped a lifetime of emotional volatility. I let him talk. I let him build his castle of cards. Silence, my father had taught me, is not empty, it is a vacuum, and eventually a vacuum pulls everything into it. 3 days after the breakup, Brandon went to our apartment. I knew he would. It was a Wednesday, the day he usually left work early to play squash, but today he would be going to the second-floor walk-up in the Pearl District to collect his things and, presumably, to evict me. He likely expected a darkened room, the smell of stale crying, perhaps me curled up on the sofa begging for a second chance. He probably had a speech prepared, something magnanimous about how I could stay until the end of the month if I promised to be invisible. I wasn't there to see his face, but I saw it through the eyes of the security feed I had accessed on my tablet from the other side of the city. The camera mounted in the hallway showed him fumbling with his keys, a look of annoyed determination on his face. He opened the door and stepped inside, bracing himself for the confrontation. What he found was a ghost town. In the 48 hours since I had left the restaurant, my team had been efficient. The apartment was not just empty, it was sterile. Every trace of me was gone. My clothes, my books, the collection of rare teas I kept in the kitchen, the paintings I had bought at local markets, vanished. But it wasn't just my things. I had instructed the movers to remove everything that I had paid for, which, as it turned out, was almost everything of value in the shared space. Brandon stood in the center of the living room, blinking. The high-end Italian leather sofa? Gone. The 65-inch OLED television he loved to watch football on? Gone. The espresso machine he claimed he couldn't live without but never learned to clean? Gone. The apartment was stripped back to the bare walls and the cheap beige carpet that came with the lease. The only thing remaining was a single cardboard box in the center of the floor, labeled BRANDON in black marker. He walked over to it, his footsteps echoing loudly in the hollow room. He kicked the flap open. Inside were his gym clothes, his collection of protein shakers, a few paperback thrillers, and his PlayStation. The sum total of his contribution to our domestic life. He spun around, checking the kitchen. Empty. The bedroom, empty. The closet where he kept his suits was still full of his clothes, but the other half of the rail, my half, was bare. It was as if I had never existed. He walked back to the kitchen counter. There, sitting alone on the granite laminate, was the engagement ring. It wasn't in a box. It was just sitting there, a small, cold circle of metal. He picked it up. I watched on the grainy video feed as he held it up to the light. It was a modest diamond, one his mother had helped him pick out because it was sensible. He turned it over in his fingers. Then he saw the note. It was a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, folded once. He opened it. There were only 4 words, written in my sharp, angular handwriting, "The lease is up." He crumpled the note and threw it on the floor. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number. On my desk in the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton, my phone lit up. Brandon calling. I watched it ring. I didn't reach for it. I took a sip of my Earl Grey tea and let it go to voicemail. On the screen, Brandon paced the empty living room. He looked furious, but beneath the anger there was a flicker of something else. Fear. Not the fear of danger, but the fear of the unknown. How had the poor immigrant girl managed to move an entire apartment in 2 days? Where had she gone? And why did the apartment feel less like a home and more like a cell now that she was absent? He shook his head, physically shaking off the doubt. I could practically hear his internal monologue reasserting itself. She's crazy. She probably sold the furniture for plane tickets. She's running away. Good riddance. He shoved the ring into his pocket, grabbed the box of his belongings, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I closed the video feed. He looks distressed, a voice said from the doorway. I turned my chair. Victor was standing there, holding a tablet of his own. The suite was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Portland and the Willamette River. The decor was modern, understated, and expensive, velvet armchairs, marble surfaces, and fresh lilies that were changed every morning. It was a far cry from the walk-up in the Pearl District. This was the world I was born into, the world I had stepped out of for love, and the world I had now fully re-inhabited. He looks inconvenienced, I corrected Victor. Distress implies he has the emotional depth to understand what he has lost. Brandon is merely annoyed that his television is missing. Victor stepped into the room, his suit perfectly tailored, his demeanor professional. He was more than a bodyguard, he was the eyes and ears of the Volkov family in the West. The inventory of the apartment is complete, Victor said. "Your personal effects have been placed in storage. The furniture you purchased has been donated to the local women's shelter, as requested, and the landlord has been notified that the lease will not be renewed. Mr. Miller is listed as the sole remaining tenant." "Good," I said. "Let him figure out how to pay the rent on his salary. He always complained I didn't contribute enough. Let him enjoy the full responsibility." Victor swiped a finger across his tablet. "There is also the matter of his employment. We have reviewed the portfolio of his company, Ethylgard Pharmaceuticals **. It appears they are currently in negotiations for a merger with a European conglomerate to secure distribution rights for their new cardiac drug." I smiled. It was a cold smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. "And the European conglomerate is Valkyrie Holdings **. A subsidiary of Volkov Industries," Victor confirmed. "You are effectively the final signature on the deal that will decide the future of his company. We could kill the deal today. His stock options would be worthless. His promotion would vanish." It was tempting. It would be so easy. I could pick up a pen, make a call, and watch Brandon's career implode before he even arrived at the office this morning. I could crush him like an insect. But that was too fast. That was too merciful. "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. I looked down at the city, watching the tiny cars moving like ants. If we destroy him now, he will blame bad luck. He will blame the economy. He will play the victim again. He will say that the world is unfair. I turned back to Victor. "I don't want him to blame the world, Victor. I want him to know with absolute certainty that it was *me*, but not yet. Let the merger proceed." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." "Let the company succeed," I said. "Let the stock price soar. Let Brandon take credit for his part in the transition. Let him get that promotion to vice president. Let him buy the expensive car he wants. Let him move into a house he can barely afford with Rebecca." I walked back to the desk and picked up the file containing the guest list for the upcoming gala, the event that was occupying the slot of my canceled wedding. "I want him to climb," I said softly. "I want him to stand at the very top of his little mountain, thinking he has one, thinking he is untouchable, because the fall is only fatal if you are high enough." Victor nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Understood, the deal proceeds, and the gala." "The invitations go out tomorrow," I said. "Ensure that Ethylgard Pharmaceuticals receives a corporate table, top tier, right near the front. And Mr. Miller." "He will be on their guest list," I said. "He won't be able to resist. A high society event, strictly VIP, hosted by a mysterious European benefactor. He will bring Rebecca. He will want to show off his new status. He will walk right into the lion's den." "Very good, Miss Volkov." Victor turned to leave, but paused. "One more thing. Your mother called from Vienna. She saw the notification about the black card being used at the Italian restaurant. She wanted to know if you bought the restaurant." I laughed, a genuine sound this time. "Tell her no, I just bought my freedom. It was a bargain." The next few days passed in a blur of high-level activity that felt like waking up from a long coma. For 2 years, I had dimmed my light. I had pretended not to understand complex financial markets. I had nodded along when Brandon explained basic economic concepts to me. I had worn clothes from department stores and cooked casseroles. Now the mask was off. I spent my mornings in video conferences with our family's legal teams in Zurich and London. I spent my afternoons overseeing the details of the Volkov Foundation inaugural gala. I chose the menu, no risotto, naturally. I selected the wine list, pulling bottles from our private vineyards that Brandon couldn't afford a single glass of. I was busy, but I wasn't blind. I kept a digital eye on Brandon. He was moving fast, faster than I expected. On Friday, a notification popped up on my private Instagram feed, a burner account I used to monitor things without being seen. Brandon had posted a photo. It was him and Rebecca. They were standing on a balcony, holding glasses of white wine. Rebecca was wearing a dress that was too tight and too bright, leaning into him possessively. Brandon looked smug. He looked like a man who had traded in a Honda for a Ferrari and wanted everyone to know it. I stared at the word. It was petty. It was small. It was exactly who he was. "He has no idea," Claire, my new executive assistant, said, looking over my shoulder. She was a sharp American woman I had hired the day after the breakup, paying her triple her previous salary to be exclusively loyal to me. She handed me a tablet. Speaking of upgrades, the RSVP from his company just came in. I looked at the screen. Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals had accepted the invitation for a platinum table. The attendees were listed: the CEO, the CFO, 2 board members, and Brandon Miller, Senior Marketing Director *+1, Rebecca Sterling *. "He thinks he's been invited because of his own merit," Claire noted with a smirk. "The CEO probably gave him the seat because he's dating Rebecca." "He doesn't care how he gets in, as long as he's in the room," I said, scrolling through the list. "He thinks this is his debut. He thinks this gala is where he solidifies his place in Portland's elite." "He's going to be surprised when he sees who the hostess is," Claire said. "He won't know until the moment I walk on stage," I said. "I've instructed the event team. My name is not on the invitations. It simply says the Volkov Foundation. To him, that's just a prestigious European name. He won't connect it to Alina, the girl who clipped coupons for groceries." I stood up and walked to the dress form in the corner of the room. On it hung the gown I would wear. It was a custom piece from a designer in Paris, flown in that morning. It was midnight blue, velvet, and silk, structured and regal. It wasn't a wedding dress. It was a coronation robe disguised as evening wear. "How is the venue preparation?" I asked. "L'Orangerie has been completely booked out," Claire said. "We've hired their entire staff for the night, plus our own security. The ballroom is being transformed. The flowers you ordered, the black calla lilies, are arriving tomorrow." "And his mother?" I asked. "Patricia wasn't on the corporate list," Claire said, "but..." She hesitated. "Brandon emailed the event coordinator asking if he could purchase an extra ticket for his mother. He said she would be devastated to miss the social event of the season." I paused. Patricia, the woman who had offered me $5,000 to disappear, the woman who had sneered at my background. "Approve it," I said. Claire looked surprised. "You want her there?" "Absolutely," I said. "What is a tragedy without a chorus? Patricia wants to see the upper crust. I'll show it to her. I want her to see exactly what she threw away. I want her to sit there and realize that she traded a diamond for a piece of glass." "Done," Claire said, making a note. I walked back to the window. The sun was setting over Portland, turning the river into a ribbon of gold. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably bragging to Rebecca about the exclusive gala they were going to attend. He was probably picking out a tuxedo, thinking he looked like James Bond. He was probably telling himself that he had won. He had no idea that he was walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. "Alina, it's Brandon. I went to the apartment, very mature, clearing everything out. I assume you've gone back to Europe. Look, I hope you find what you're looking for. Maybe find someone simpler, more your speed. Take care." I stared at the message. Simpler, more your speed. I didn't reply. I didn't block him. I simply deleted the message. "Claire," I said, turning back to the room. "Yes, Miss Volkov." "Contact the jewelry house in London," I said. "The emerald necklace from the Romanov collection that my grandmother left me. Have it sent over." "The Romanov emeralds?" Claire's eyes widened. "That piece is in a museum loan." "Recall the loan," I said calmly. "I need it for Saturday." "Is it for the outfit?" "No," I said, touching my bare neck. "It's for the statement. Brandon told me I needed to be an asset. He told me I needed to look the part." I smiled, and this time the smile was dangerous. "I'm going to wear more value around my neck than his entire company is worth. I want the stones to catch the light when I destroy him. I'll make the call, Claire said, practically running to her phone. I sat back down in the velvet armchair. The stage was set. The players were moving into position. The silence I had maintained was about to break, not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap. I closed my eyes and pictured the moment. The doors opening, the hush of the crowd. The look on Brandon's face when he realized that the poor immigrant was the one signing his paychecks. It wasn't revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was simply a correction, a realignment of the universe. Brandon wanted a story. He wanted a drama. I would give him one he would never forget. The week leading up to the gala was a study in contrast. While I moved through the world of high finance and event planning, moving mountains with a single email, Brandon was living in the illusion of success. I learned through the grapevine that he had been officially offered the vice president position, pending the finalization of the merger with Valkyrie Holdings. He had celebrated by leasing a Porsche. He was spending money he didn't have yet, banking on a future that was entirely in my hands. On Thursday, I decided I needed to see him one last time before the end. Not to speak to him, but to observe him in the wild, unknowing. I had Victor drive the town car to the financial district around lunchtime. We parked across the street from his office building. The tinted windows made me invisible. At 12:15, Brandon emerged. He looked good, I had to admit. He was wearing a new suit, better cut than his old ones, likely Rebecca's influence. He walked with a new swagger. He was with two colleagues, men I recognized as the sycophants who usually ignored him, but were now orbiting him due to his impending promotion. Brandon was talking animatedly, using his hands, laughing loud enough to be heard across the street. Then Rebecca arrived. She pulled up in a red convertible, illegal, parked in the loading zone. She hopped out, flung her arms around his neck, and kissed him deeply. It was a performance. Everything about them was a performance. Brandon looked around to make sure people were watching, then led her toward a high-end steakhouse. He looks happy, Victor noted from the driver's seat. He looks confident, I said. There is a difference. I watched them disappear into the restaurant. 2 years. I had given him 2 years of loyalty, of support, of genuine affection, and he had discarded it the moment he thought he could do better. It wasn't the heartbreak that fueled me anymore. It was the insult to my intelligence. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was weak. Let's go, Victor, I said. I've seen enough. Back to the Ritz. No, I said. Take me to the venue. I want to check the lighting. I want to make sure there are no shadows where he can hide. As we drove away, I felt the final thread of attachment snap. The man I had watched on the street was a stranger. A cliché. A man who measured his worth by the reflection in others' eyes. Saturday was 2 days away. The invitations had been delivered. The RSVPs were locked. The trap was set. The silence was almost over, and when I finally spoke, the whole world would listen. The Friday before the gala was gray and drizzling, the kind of Portland weather that usually drove people indoors to coffee shops and bookstores. But I was not looking for comfort. I was looking for armor. I stood inside the hushed, velvet-lined interior of Maison Dubois *, the city's most exclusive haute couture boutique. It was a place where there were no price tags on the garments, and the door was kept locked, opened only for those with an appointment. The air smelled of expensive leather, fresh orchids, and the distinct, crisp scent of money. I was standing before a 3-way mirror in the private VIP suite at the back of the store. The tailor, a fastidious French woman named Céline, was pinned at my hem, adjusting the fall of the midnight blue silk. It was the gown for tomorrow night. It was structured, architectural, and devastatingly elegant. It didn't scream for attention, it commanded it. "It is perfect, mademoiselle," Céline murmured around a mouthful of pins. "The silhouette, it is dangerous." "Dangerous is good, Céline," I said, studying my reflection. The woman in the mirror was a stranger to the Alina of 2 weeks ago. That Alina had worn cardigans and sensible flats. This Elena wore power like a second skin. My phone, resting on a marble side table, buzzed silently. It was a message from Victor. Target approaching. ETA 2 minutes. I didn't flinch. I had known they were coming. My team had been tracking Brandon's credit card activity. He had booked a styling appointment at this very boutique for Rebecca, likely burning through his entire bonus check to ensure she looked the part of a vice president's partner. He wanted to parade her. He wanted to prove that he belonged in this world of silk and private appointments. "Selling," I said softly. "I believe we are about to have company. Leave the curtains to the main salon open slightly." Selling looked up, confused, but she nodded. "As you wish." 2 minutes later, I heard the front buzzer ring. Then, the heavy glass door opened, bringing with it a gust of rain and the sound of voices that were entirely too loud for this sanctuary. "I'm telling you, babe, this is where the mayor's wife shops." Brandon's voice drifted back to me. "It's the best in the city, nothing but the best for you." "Oh my God, Brandon, it's gorgeous," Rebecca squealed. Her voice grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Do you think they have that red Valentino I saw in Vogue?" "If they don't, we'll order it," Brandon declared expansively. I remained still, hidden in the semi-private alcove of the VIP suite, but visible if one looked closely. I watched them through the reflection of the mirror. Brandon walked in first, shaking his umbrella out on the pristine marble floor, a faux pas that made the boutique manager, Monsieur Henry, wince visibly. Brandon was wearing his new suit, the one that fit him a little too tightly across the shoulders. Rebecca trailed behind him, dripping in logos. Her bag was Gucci, her belt was Hermes, her shoes were Louboutin. She looked like a walking billboard, a desperate attempt to signal status through branding. And behind them, trailing like a dark cloud, was Patricia. Brandon's mother looked uncomfortable but determined. She was scanning the racks with a critical eye, likely calculating how much these clothes cost and judging the women who wore them. "Monsieur," Brandon announced to Henry, who was approaching them with a practiced, icy smile. "I have an appointment. Brandon Miller. I'm looking for a gown for my partner, something show-stopping. We have a very important gala tomorrow." "Ah, yes," Henry said, his voice smooth and non-committal. "The Volkov Foundation Gala. Many of our clients are attending." "Exactly," Brandon beamed, puffing out his chest. "I'm with Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals, top tier." "Very good," Henry said. "Feel free to browse the main collection. However, I must ask you to lower your voices slightly. We have a private client in the suite." Brandon waved a dismissive hand. Of course, we won't disturb anyone." They began to move through the store. I watched as Rebecca pulled dresses off the racks with careless hands, the hangers scraping loudly. She held up a delicate chiffon number against her chest. "Too pale," Patricia critiqued loudly. "Washes you out, you need red or gold, something that says I have arrived." "Like this." Rebecca grabbed a sequined gold gown that looked more appropriate for a Las Vegas nightclub than a charity gala. "Perfect," Brandon said, checking the price tag surreptitiously and paling slightly. Maybe let's keep looking, just to see all the options." I decided it was time. I stepped out of the fitting alcove and into the main salon. I was still wearing the midnight blue gown, the fabric flowing around me like water. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, adjusting the cuff of my sleeve. It took them a moment. Rebecca was the first to notice. She looked up from a rack of scarves, her eyes widening. She nudged Brandon. "Babe," she whispered, "look at that dress." Brandon turned. He looked at the dress first, the sheer opulence of it, the way it caught the light. Then his eyes traveled up. He froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical blow. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stood there, clutching a velvet hanger, staring at the ghost of his past life. "Elena." The name came out as a strangled whisper. Patricia spun around, her eyes bulged. "What is she doing here?" I turned slowly, as if noticing them for the first time. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. No anger, no surprise, just a mild, polite recognition, as if I had run into a vague acquaintance at the post office. "Hello, Brandon," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with their shock. "Patricia, and this must be Rebecca." Rebecca bristled, stepping closer to Brandon and looping her arm through his possessively. "Yes, I'm Rebecca, Brandon's fiancée." She emphasized the word, flashing a ring that was noticeably larger than the one Brandon had given me, though I could tell from the cut it was likely lab-grown to save costs. "Congratulations," I said simply. "What are you doing here, Alina?" Patricia demanded, marching forward. She looked me up and down, taking in the gown, her eyes narrowed. "Did you get a job here? I suppose a seamstress makes decent money if the clientele is rich enough." It was such a predictable insult. I almost smiled. They couldn't conceive of a world where I wasn't serving them. "No, Mother," Brandon hissed, stepping forward. He was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "She's wearing the merchandise. Alina, take that off. You're going to get in trouble. You can't afford to pay for that if you rip it." "I'm just trying it on, Brandon," I said. "Trying it on?" Rebecca laughed. It was a sharp, unkind sound. "Honey, this is Mason Dubois asterisk. The socks here cost more than your rent. Don't embarrass yourself. Just because you tricked some guy into buying you dinner last week with a fancy credit card doesn't mean you belong here." So Brandon had told her about the black card, but he had clearly spun it as a trick, a fraud, or a sugar daddy situation. He hadn't told them the truth because he couldn't accept it himself. "I appreciate your concern," I said, turning back to the mirror and adjusting my collar. "But I think I'll be fine." "You don't get it," Brandon said, his voice rising. "This isn't a game, Alina. You're crashing, you're spiraling. I know you're trying to make me jealous by showing up at the places I go, pretending to be someone you're not. But it's sad, really sad." He took a step toward me, his confidence returning as he convinced himself of his own narrative. "Look at you," he gestured to the gown. "You're playing dress-up. You're trying to look like Rebecca, but you're not her, you never will be." "Thank God for that," I murmured. "Excuse me," Rebecca snapped. "I said the dress fits perfectly," I said, turning to face them fully. "Unlike that gold sequin number you're holding, it pulls at the hips, Rebecca. It's designed for a straighter figure." Rebecca turned red. She threw the dress at Brandon. "She's insulting me. Brandon, do something." "Listen here, Alina," Brandon growled, moving into my personal space. "You need to leave. Now, we are paying customers. We are here to buy a gown for the Volkov Gala. You are ruining the experience." He looked around for the manager. Monsieur Henry." Henry appeared instantly, stepping out from the back office. He looked from Brandon's flushed, angry face to my calm demeanor. "Is there a problem, monsieur?" Henry asked, his tone clipped. "Yes," Brandon pointed at me. "This woman is harassing us. She's trying on clothes she has no intention of buying. She's disturbing the clientele. I want her removed." Patricia chimed in. "She's a squatter. She used to live off my son. Now she's stalking him. It's a security risk." Henry blinked. He looked at me. I didn't say a word. I just raised one eyebrow, a fraction of an inch. Henry turned back to Brandon. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I believe there is a misunderstanding," Henry said, his voice dripping with ice. "Mademoiselle Volkov is not trying on clothes she cannot afford. She is standing in her own private fitting suite." The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon froze, his finger still pointing at me wavered. "Mademoiselle, who?" "Volkov," Henry repeated clearly. "Alina Volkov." Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, hysterical sound. "Volkov, like, the foundation, the gala?" He looked at me, shaking his head. No, that's insane. Her name is Alina Petrescu. She's nobody." "My mother's name was Petrescu," I said softly. "I used it to ensure that the people who claimed to love me were interested in me, not my inheritance." I locked eyes with him. The experiment, as you know, yielded disappointing results. Brandon took a step back. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked from me to Henry to the logo on the wall. The gears were turning in his head, grinding against the rust of his own arrogance. You're related to them, he stammered, to the organizers. Related? I let a small, dry smile touch my lips. Brandon, I am the foundation. Rebecca let out a gasp. She looked down at the Gucci bag in her hand, then at the gown I was wearing. The dynamic in the room shifted violently. Suddenly, her logos looked cheap. Her arrogance looked like insecurity. That's impossible, Patricia whispered. You lived in that dumpy apartment. You drove that awful car. I live where I choose, I said, and I drive what I choose, just as I choose who remains in my life. I turned to Henry. Henry, I believe I'm done with the fitting. The gown is perfect. Have it sent to the penthouse at the Ritz. Of course, madame, Henry bowed. I looked at the trio standing before me. They looked shattered, confused, terrified. Wait, Brandon said, reaching out a hand as if to touch me, then pulling it back. Elena, wait, if you are who you say you are, why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? I asked. Would you have loved me more, Brandon, or would you just have loved my money? He didn't answer. He couldn't. We both knew the answer. And besides, I continued, glancing at the gold dress Rebecca had discarded, you wanted someone who fit into your world, someone who could help your career, someone who was an asset. I stepped closer to him. I smelled his cologne, the same one I had bought him for Christmas last year. Be careful what you wish for, Brandon. You wanted to be near power. Well, tomorrow night, you'll be right in the center of it. I look forward to seeing you there. I turned to go back into the changing alcove, but Rebecca found her voice. It was shrill, desperate. You can't treat us like this, she cried out. We are customers, we have money. Brandon is a vice president. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I just spoke to Henry over my shoulder. Henry, I said, this is a private appointment. I believe the store policy is strictly one client at a time in the VIP section. Indeed, madame, Henry said. He turned to Brandon and his group. I must ask you to leave. You can browse the ready-to-wear collection in the foyer, or perhaps visit our outlet location downtown. Outlet? Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls. How dare you? Please, Henry gestured to the door. Two security guards, large men in black suits who had materialized from the shadows, stepped forward. Brandon looked at me one last time. His eyes were pleading now. He was realizing, in real time, the magnitude of his mistake. He wasn't just losing a girl, he was losing the lottery ticket he had been searching for his entire life. He had held the winning numbers in his hand for 2 years and thrown them in the trash. Elena, he choked out. Goodbye, Brandon, I said, closing the velvet curtain between us. I heard the commotion as they were escorted out. I heard Patricia threatening to sue. I heard Rebecca crying. And I heard Brandon's silence. When I stepped out of the boutique 10 minutes later, dressed in my street clothes, a cashmere trench coat and sunglasses, my town car was waiting. It was still raining, but I didn't feel it. Victor held an umbrella over my head as I walked to the car. On the sidewalk, huddled under the awning of the shop next door, stood Brandon, Rebecca, and Patricia. They hadn't left. They were waiting, perhaps hoping it was a joke, perhaps hoping to confront me again. They watched as the driver opened the door of the Bentley. They watched as Victor bowed his head. They watched as I slid into the backseat without acknowledging their existence. As the car pulled away, splashing a puddle of rainwater onto Brandon's new shoes, I caught a glimpse of his face. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked haunted. I leaned back in the leather seat and closed my eyes. The encounter had been draining, but necessary. It was the final test. I needed to see if there was any part of me that still felt small in his presence. There wasn't. To the hotel, Miss Volkov, Victor asked from the front seat. Yes, I said, and Victor. Yes, miss. Call the florist. Double the order of black lilies for the gala. Double, miss. Yes, I said, watching the city blur past the rain-streaked window. I have a feeling we're going to be celebrating a funeral tomorrow night. A funeral. The funeral of Brandon Miller's ego, I said. I want it to be beautiful. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of logistics. I finalized the seating chart, placing Brandon's table strategically. It wasn't in the back, hidden away. No, that would be too kind. I placed table 14, the Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals table, right at the edge of the dance floor, directly in front of the podium. I wanted him to have the best seat in the house. I wanted him to see every diamond on my neck, every thread of silk on my gown. I wanted him to be so close he could see the pulse in my throat when I destroyed him. Claire came into the room as I was reviewing the speech. "We have a situation," she said, looking amused. "Brandon has been calling the foundation office for the last hour. He's trying to verify if Alina Volkov is real." "And what did you tell him?" "We told him that the Volkov family is very private, and we cannot disclose personal information about the chairwoman. But we confirmed that the chairwoman will be making the keynote address tomorrow." "Perfect," I said. "Let him stew. Let him spend the next 24 hours agonizing over whether it's really me or if he just hallucinated in a dress shop." "He also asked if he could upgrade his table to the VIP circle," Claire added. I laughed out loud. Of course he did. Even now, facing the abyss, he's trying to hustle. "What should I tell him?" "Tell him the VIP circle is by invitation only," I said. "But tell him we have made a special accommodation for him and his party. Tell him his seat has been curated." "He'll think that's a compliment," Claire noted. "Let him think what he wants," I replied. "Hope is the cruelest torture, Claire. I want him to walk into that ballroom full of hope. I want him to think that maybe, just maybe, this is all a misunderstanding. That maybe, if he smiles charmingly enough, he can win me back. That maybe he can still leverage this connection." I stood up and walked to the balcony. The rain had stopped, and the city lights were flickering on. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the wind. "Tomorrow, the immigrant girl would die, and in her place, the Volkov heir would rise." I touched the locket around my neck, a cheap little silver thing Brandon had bought me for our first anniversary. It was the only thing I had kept. Inside was a picture of us, smiling, oblivious. I unclasped it. I held it over the railing of the balcony, 30 stories up. I didn't hesitate. I opened my fingers. I watched the silver speck tumble down, 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 until it disappeared into the darkness of the city below. The vow of silence was almost over. The vow of power was about to begin. I went back inside and closed the glass door, locking out the cold. I slept soundly that night, the dreamless sleep of a woman who knows exactly who she is. The transformation of *Elorangerie* was total. What had been a high-end Italian bistro just a few weeks ago was now a cavern of shadows and light, a sanctuary of power constructed specifically for this night. I had ordered the walls draped in heavy charcoal velvet, absorbing the sound, making the vast ballroom feel intimate and dangerous. Thousands of black baccara roses and calla lilies, flown in from Holland that morning, stood in tall crystal vases, their dark petals drinking in the ambient light. I stood backstage in the small green room usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. The monitor on the wall showed a live feed of the ballroom entrance. I watched them arrive. The senators, the tech moguls, the heirs to shipping fortunes. They moved with the quiet, understated confidence of people who shaped the world rather than just lived in it. And then I saw them. Brandon, Rebecca, and Patricia. They arrived in the Porsche Brandon had leased 3 days ago. I watched as Brandon tossed the keys to the valet with a flourish that was a beat too theatrical. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket, a rental, I noted from the way the fabric bunched at the shoulders, and offered his arm to Rebecca. Rebecca was wearing the gold sequin dress from Maison Dubois *, the one I had told her was ill-fitting. The one Patricia had insisted made her look like she had arrived. Under the unforgiving lighting of the entryway, she didn't look like she had arrived. She looked like a disco ball dropped into a funeral parlor. Beside her, Patricia wore a stiff taffeta gown in a shade of aggressive purple, her eyes darting around the room, hungry to be seen. They stepped onto the red carpet. Brandon paused, waiting for the photographers to flash. They didn't. The press pit was filled with photographers from Vogue *, the Financial Times *, and Vanity Fair *. They were waiting for the arrival of the French ambassador. When Brandon Miller, senior marketing director of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, stepped into frame, they lowered their cameras. One photographer actually checked his watch. I saw Brandon's smile falter. He pulled Rebecca forward, forcing a laugh, pretending he hadn't noticed the snub. He walked through the heavy double doors and into the lion's den. "Showtime, Miss Volkov," Claire said, appearing at my elbow. She handed me a glass of water. "Your heart rate?" "Steady," I said, 60 beats per minute. "Ice," she murmured approvingly. "The CEO of Ethelgard is already at his table. He looks nervous. Rumor is he heard about the acquisition this morning." "Good," I said. "Let him sweat." I turned back to the monitor. I wanted to watch Brandon navigate the room. It was a cruel form of study, but I couldn't look away. He was drowning, though he didn't know it yet. He walked into the main ballroom and immediately tried to mingle. I saw him approach a group of men standing near the bar. It was the board of directors for a major energy conglomerate. Brandon tapped one of them on the shoulder, offering his hand, likely launching into his elevator pitch. The man turned, looked at Brandon's outstretched hand, looked at the ill-fitting tuxedo, and simply turned back to his conversation. Brandon withdrew his hand, smoothing his hair, his face flushing pink. He turned to Rebecca, whispering something that was likely a lie about how rude the man was. They made their way to table 14. I had placed them perfectly. They were right at the edge of the dance floor, unobstructed, but they were also isolated. The tables surrounding them were occupied by the Japanese delegation and the German industrial bloc, groups that spoke little English and had zero patience for small talk. As they sat down, I saw the CEO of Ethelgard, Mr. Sterling, Rebecca's father, hurrying toward them. He looked pale. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. I turned up the volume on the monitor. The microphone planted in the floral centerpiece of table 14 picked up the audio clearly. "Dad," Rebecca squealed, waving, "look at this place, it's incredible. Brandon got us the best table." Mr. Sterling didn't smile. He gripped the back of Brandon's chair, his knuckles white. "Brandon, Rebecca, keep your voices down." "What's wrong, sir?" Brandon asked, standing up to shake his boss's hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Exciting night, isn't it? I heard the foundation is looking for partners. I have my pitch deck ready on my phone if I run into the chairwoman." Mr. Sterling stared at him. "You idiot," he hissed. "You don't pitch to the Volkovs, you wait to be summoned. And if you are summoned, you pray." "Volkovs?" Brandon laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Sir, relax, it's just a name." "Actually, funny story, my ex, the crazy one I told you about, she tried to crash my appointment at Maison Dubois yesterday claiming she was a Volkov. Delusional, right? She's probably catering this event." Mr. Sterling's eyes bulged. "She? What?" "Yeah," Brandon continued, pouring himself a glass of champagne. "She put on this act, pretended she owned the place. It was pathetic, really. I expect she's somewhere in the kitchen washing dishes right now." Mr. Sterling looked like he was about to stroke out. "Brandon, what was her name? Your ex?" "Elena," Brandon said. "Elena Petrescu. But she's calling herself Elena Volkov now. Identity theft, probably." Mr. Sterling sank into the empty chair next to them. He put his head in his hands. "Oh my God, you dated Elena Volkov." "I dated a girl who thinks she's Elena Volkov," Brandon corrected, winking at Rebecca. "Don't worry, sir, I handled it. I put her in her place." "You put her in her place," Sterling repeated, his voice hollow. "You put the majority shareholder of the company that just bought us in her place." Brandon froze. The champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" "I got the memo an hour ago," Sterling whispered. "Ethelgard has been acquired. Hostile takeover. 51% of the stock was purchased this morning by a shell company, Valkyrie Holdings Asterisk. So, Brandon asked, his voice trembling slightly. That's good, right? Mergers mean bonuses. Valkyrie is a subsidiary of the Volkov Foundation, Sterling said, looking up at Brandon with the eyes of a man watching a train wreck. The chairwoman of the foundation is Alina Volkov. She is our new boss, Brandon. She owns us. The silence at table 14 was absolute. I watched Brandon's face. It was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. His brain was trying to reject the information, trying to force the reality back into the shape he understood. The shape where he was the winner and I was the loser. No, Brandon whispered. That's impossible. She clipped coupons, sir. She drove a Honda. She cooked meatloaf. Old money doesn't scream, you fool, Sterling snapped. It whispers, and you apparently screamed in its face. At that moment, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The ambient chatter died instantly. The spotlight hit the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice of the master of ceremonies boomed. Distinguished guests, please welcome the chairwoman of the Volkov Foundation, Miss Alina Volkov. I stepped out from the wings. I was wearing the midnight blue gown. The silk flowed around me like liquid night. Around my neck, the Romanov emeralds glittered with a cold, green fire. They were heavy, ancient stones that had survived revolutions and wars. They were worth more than the entire gross domestic product of some small nations. I walked to the podium. I didn't rush. I moved with the measured cadence of someone who knows the world will wait. I gripped the sides of the podium. The light was blinding, but I could see them. I could see table 14. I saw Brandon. He was standing, half-crouched, as if he had been trying to flee when the lights went down. His mouth was hanging open. His eyes were fixed on me, wide and terrified. He was looking at the woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a charity case, and he was seeing her for the first time. Beside him, Patricia had her hand over her mouth. She was staring at the emeralds. She knew jewelry. She knew that those stones were not glass. She knew that the $5,000 she had offered me wouldn't even cover the insurance premium on the clasp. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," I said. My voice filled the room, amplified, rich and steady. "Thank you all for coming." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I looked directly at table 14. "Tonight is a celebration of vision," I continued. "In business, as in life, the most dangerous mistake one can make is a failure of valuation. We look at an asset and we judge it by its surface. We see a rough exterior and we assume it has no worth. We see silence and we mistake it for weakness." I saw Brandon flinch. He knew. Every person in that room thought I was talking about emerging markets or stock portfolios, but Brandon knew I was talking to him. "The Volkov Foundation has always prided itself on seeing the truth," I said. "We invest in authenticity, and we divest." I let the word hang, sharp as a guillotine blade. "From fraud." "We recently acquired a new portfolio of companies here in Portland," I said, gesturing vaguely to the room. "We did so because we saw potential where others saw only stagnation. But let me be clear, we acquired the structures. The personnel, that is a different matter. A company, like a family, is only as strong as its integrity. When that integrity is compromised, we do not repair it, we replace it." Mr. Sterling had his head bowed, practically praying to the tablecloth. Brandon was white as a sheet. "Tonight," I concluded, "enjoy the hospitality. Drink the wine, celebrate the future, because for some of you, the future is going to look very different starting tomorrow morning. Thank you." The applause was thunderous. It was the polite, enthusiastic applause of people who wanted to be on the winning side. I stepped down from the podium. The crowd parted for me. It was like Moses and the Red Sea. Billionaires and politicians stepped back, nodding respectfully, murmuring my name. I didn't stop for them. I walked straight toward the edge of the dance floor. I walked toward table 14. Brandon saw me coming. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. He looked for an escape route, but he was boxed in by the German industrialists. He had nowhere to go. I stopped 3 feet from the table. Mr. Sterling shot out of his chair so fast he knocked his wine glass over. "Miss Volkov," he gasped, ignoring the red stains spreading on the tablecloth. "An honor, a true honor. I am William Sterling, CEO of Ethelgard. We are so excited about the acquisition." I looked at Sterling briefly, then dismissed him with a nod. My eyes landed on Brandon. He was shaking, visibly shaking. "Elena," he whispered, it was a plea, a question, a prayer. "Mr. Miller," I said. My tone was polite, distant, the way one speaks to a waiter who has brought the wrong order. "I trust the seating is to your satisfaction." He struggled to speak. He cleared his throat. "Elena, please, we need to talk. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Didn't know what, Brandon?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. The emeralds at my throat caught the light, flashing green fire. "You didn't know I was a Volkov, or you didn't know that people deserve respect regardless of their bank balance." "I made a mistake," he choked out. He stepped forward, reaching for my hand. "Baby, please, I was stressed, the pressure. You know how I get. I love you. I've always loved you. This Rebecca thing, it's nothing. It's just business." From the corner of my eye, I saw Rebecca gasp. She stood up, her face furious. "Excuse me, nothing." I ignored her. I kept my eyes on Brandon. "Business," I repeated. "Yes, let's talk business. You wanted a partner who was an asset, didn't you? Someone who could help your career." "Yes," Brandon said eagerly, latching onto the lifeline. "Yes, and look at you. You're amazing. We could be a power couple. Imagine what we could do together, with my drive and your resources." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, standing in the ruins of his own making, he was trying to close the deal. I laughed. It was a soft, genuine laugh. "Oh, Brandon," I said, "you still don't understand. I don't need a partner. And I certainly don't need a marketing director who doesn't know the value of the product he's holding." I turned to Mr. Sterling. "William," I said. "Yes, ma'am." Sterling straightened up, terrified. "I've been reviewing the personnel files for the merger," I said, my voice conversational. "I noticed some redundancies in the marketing department, specifically at the senior director level." Sterling paled, but he understood instantly. He looked at Brandon. He looked at me. He made the calculation in a split second. I agree, Miss Volkov," Sterling stammered. "We have been thinking the same thing. The department is bloated." "Good," I said. "I expect that to be rectified by Monday morning." Brandon looked between us, the realization crashing down on him. "Wait, no, you can't. William, tell her. I'm the VP. You promised me the VP spot." "There is no VP spot, Brandon," Sterling said quietly, refusing to look him in the eye. "Not for you." "Elena," Brandon grabbed my arm. The security guards were there in a nanosecond. 2 large hands clamped onto Brandon's shoulder and wrist, twisting him away from me. He yelped in pain. "Do not touch her," Victor's voice growled from behind me. I held up a hand. The guards paused, holding Brandon firmly. "It's all right, Victor," I said. I stepped closer to Brandon, so close I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "You wanted a severance package," I said softly, echoing his mother's words from the restaurant. "I believe your company policy offers 2 weeks' pay. I'll make sure the check is mailed to your new address, assuming you can still afford the rent on the Porsche." I shifted my gaze to Patricia. She was sitting in her chair, frozen, clutching her fake designer bag like a shield. "Mrs. Miller," I said, "I hope you enjoy the meal. It's risotto tonight. I made sure the chef cooked it properly this time." Patricia made a small squeaking sound. I turned finally to Rebecca. She was staring at Brandon with pure disgust. The business comment had done its work. "He's all yours," I told her, though I wouldn't count on that promotion paying for the wedding. I turned my back on them. "Enjoy the evening," I threw over my shoulder. I walked away. I walked back toward the table where the French ambassador was waiting for me. I felt the eyes of the entire room on my back. Behind me, I heard Brandon's voice, rising in panic. "Elena, you can't do this. I love you, Elena." I heard the scuffle of security. I heard Mr. Sterling hissing at him to shut up. I heard the murmur of the crowd, the delicious scandal rippling through the room. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I took my seat next to the ambassador. He kissed my hand. "A dramatic entrance, Mademoiselle Volkov," he said with a smile, "and a very decisive management style." "Efficiency is key, Mr. Ambassador," I said, picking up my champagne glass. I looked across the room. Security was escorting Brandon and his party toward the exit. Brandon was arguing, looking back at me, desperate. Patricia was weeping. Rebecca was walking 5 feet apart from them, furiously typing on her phone. The doors closed behind them. The room breathed a sigh of relief. The music started, a live orchestra playing a waltz. I took a sip of champagne. It was cold, crisp, and tasted of victory. I had stripped him of his narrative. I had stripped him of his career. I had stripped him of his dignity. And I had done it all without raising my voice, without shedding a tear, and without breaking a sweat. The quiet revenge was complete. But the night wasn't over. As the music swelled, I saw Mr. Sterling approaching my table again, looking humble, holding a folder. The merger documents. I smiled. Brandon was the past. This was the future. And looking at the way the room revolved around me, the way the light caught the emeralds, the way the silence bent to my will, I knew I was finally home. The silence that followed the gala was not like the silence in the restaurant. It was not the suffocating, heavy silence of humiliation. It was the expansive, echoing silence of a battlefield after the cannons have ceased firing and the smoke has cleared. It was the silence of victory. I sat in the back of the town car as it glided through the rain-slicked streets of Portland. It was 2:00 a.m. Next to me, Victor was reviewing the security reports on his tablet, the blue light illuminating his stoic face. "The merger press release went out at midnight," he said quietly. "The stock is already up 4% in pre-market trading in London. The narrative is that Volkov has stepped in to restructure a failing asset. The market approves of your ruthlessness." "And Mr. Miller?" I asked, looking out at the city lights. "Security escorted him off the premises at 10:15 p.m., Victor reported. "He attempted to re-enter through the kitchen service entrance 10 minutes later. He was discouraged. He is currently at a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. It appears Miss Sterling did not allow him to return to her condo." I felt a twinge of something, not pity, but a distant, clinical sadness. A Motel 6. 2 weeks ago, he had been measuring the drapes for a corner office. Now, he was likely staring at a water-stained ceiling, wondering how the tectonic plates of his life had shifted so violently. "He will come to the office on Monday," I said. "He won't believe it's over. He has a pathological belief in his own ability to talk his way out of consequences." "We will be ready," Victor said. I leaned my head back against the leather seat. I was exhausted, but my mind was crystal clear. The silent vow I had made to myself in that restaurant, the vow to reclaim my dignity without raising my voice, was almost fulfilled. There was just one loose end left to tie. Monday morning broke with a relentless, driving rain. It was a perfect backdrop for a corporate execution. I arrived at the Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals headquarters at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I didn't enter through the side door or the garage. I walked through the main glass revolving doors. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored to within an inch of its life, and heels that clicked with authority on the marble floor of the lobby. The atmosphere in the building was electric with fear. The news of the acquisition and the public scene at the gala had spread like wildfire. As I walked to the elevator banks, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Employees pressed themselves against the walls to let me pass. I saw fear in their eyes, but I also saw respect. They knew who I was now. Mr. Sterling was waiting for me on the executive floor. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His tie was slightly askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Miss Volkov," he said, rushing forward to press the elevator button for me, even though I had already pressed it. "Welcome, we have prepared the conference room. The transition team is ready." "Good morning, William," I said breezily. "I trust you've handled the personnel adjustments we discussed." "Yes," Sterling swallowed hard. "Human Resources has prepared the packet. Mr. Miller's access badge has been deactivated. His accounts are locked. We are just waiting for him to, well, if he shows up." "He's here," I said, glancing at the security monitor mounted behind the reception desk. On the screen, Brandon was standing at the turnstiles in the lobby. He was wearing the same suit from Friday, not the tuxedo, but his power suit. He looked disheveled. He was swiping his badge aggressively against the reader. The light flashed red. He swiped again. Red. He started yelling at the security guard. "Let him up," I said. Sterling looked at me, alarmed. "Miss Volkov, are you sure? He could be volatile." "I'm sure," I said. "Bring him to your office. I'll meet him there." I walked into the CEO's office, my office now, technically, and stood by the window. The view was impressive. You could see the Willamette River, the bridges, the gray skyline. It was the view Brandon had coveted for years. He had talked about this view incessantly, fantasizing about the day he would stand here and look down on the world. The door opened behind me. "Sir, this is ridiculous," Brandon's voice boomed. "My badge is demagnetized, and the guard tried to tell me I'm not on the list. You need to fire that guy." I didn't turn around. I let him talk. "William, listen to me," Brandon continued, his voice breathless, manic. "Saturday night, it was a misunderstanding. She's emotional. We had a bad breakup. She's doing this to get back at me. It's a lover's quarrel. You can't let personal drama affect business. I'm the VP. I have the strategy for Q4. You need me." "Brandon," Sterling's voice was quiet, defeated. "No, listen," Brandon insisted. "I can fix this. I'll talk to her. I know how to handle her. She just wants attention. Once she calms down, she'll sell the company back or step down. She doesn't know anything about pharma. She's an event planner, for God's sake. She's bluffing." "She is not bluffing," I said. I turned around slowly. Brandon froze. He was standing in the middle of the room, his hands gesturing wildly. When he saw me, his arms dropped to his sides. I wasn't the Alina he knew. I wasn't the girl in the apron. I wasn't even the woman in the gown from Saturday. I was the chairman. I was the person who signed the checks. I was the institution. "Alina," he breathed. He tried to smile, but it was a rictus of terror. "Hi, I was just explaining to William that we need to separate our personal history from the company's future." "I agree," I said, walking around the massive oak desk and sitting in the leather executive chair. It was comfortable. That is why this meeting is strictly professional. I picked up a manila envelope lying on the desk. "Brandon Miller," I read the label. "Employment terminated effective immediately. Cause, gross misconduct, reputational damage to the firm, and redundancy." I slid the envelope across the polished wood. It stopped at the edge, right in front of his hips. "Sign the acknowledgement, and security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. You have 10 minutes. Brandon stared at the envelope. His face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, a desperate, pathetic charm. "Alina, come on," he said, taking a step toward the desk. "You can't be serious. This is me. It's Brandon. We were going to get married." "We were," I noted, "until you decided I was a liability." "I didn't mean it," he cried. "My mother, you know how she is, she pressured me, and Rebecca threw herself at me. I was weak. I'm a man, Alina. I made a mistake, but I love you. I've always loved you." He placed his hands on the desk, leaning in, using his height to try and intimidate me or perhaps seduce me. It was a tactic that might have worked 2 years ago. Now it just looked sad. "I saw you at the restaurant," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The way you looked at me, you still feel it. I know you do. You wouldn't have bought a whole company just to fire me if you didn't care. I looked at him, I really looked at him. I searched for the man I had loved. I looked for the kindness, the ambition, the spark. But all I saw was a hollow suit, a man who mirrored whatever he thought the world wanted to see, a man who had no core, no center, no soul. You flatter yourself, Brandon, I said softly. What? I didn't buy this company to fire you, I said. I bought this company because it was undervalued and mismanaged. It was a good investment. Firing you? I shrugged. That is just administrative housekeeping. You are a line item, Brandon, a rounding error. The color drained from his face. To be hated is one thing, hate implies passion. To be dismissed as a clerical detail is entirely another. You're lying, he hissed. You're vindictive, you're a bitter, crazy bitch. And you, I said, standing up, are trespassing. I pressed the intercom button on the desk. Security to the CEO's office, immediately. You can't do this, Brandon shouted, grabbing the envelope and ripping it in half. I built this department, I am this company. You are nothing, Sterling spoke up from the corner, finally finding his spine. You're a fraud, Brandon. We've been reviewing your accounts. The expense reports, the inflated numbers. It's all there. Honestly, Miss Volkov is doing you a favor by just firing you. If we pressed charges for the embezzlement on the corporate card, you'd be leaving in handcuffs. Brandon spun around to face Sterling, his jaw dropping. You approved those expenses. I approved client dinners, Sterling said coldly, not weekends in Napa with my daughter. The door burst open. 2 security guards entered. Mr. Miller is leaving, I said. Ensure he takes nothing that is proprietary property. That includes the laptop and the phone. The phone is mine, Brandon yelled as the guards grabbed his arms. Company plan, I reminded him, hand it over. One of the guards deftly plucked the phone from Brandon's pocket. Brandon thrashed, but he was no match for them. They began to drag him toward the door. Elena, he screamed, looking back at me over his shoulder. Elena, wait, we can work this out. I can change, I'll do anything. Please, I have debt, the Porsche lease. I can't pay it. Walk, the guard ordered, shoving him into the hallway. Elena, his voice cracked, a high, desperate sound that echoed down the corridor. I loved you. The doors closed. The sound was cut off instantly. The silence returned. I sat back down in the chair. My heart was beating calmly. There was no adrenaline rush, no surge of triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. Sterling looked at me, terrified. Miss Volkov, about what he said, regarding the expenses. We will audit the entire department, William, I said, picking up a pen. But for now, I want a cappuccino, and get someone to clean the fingerprints off this desk. The fallout in the weeks that followed was swift and total. Brandon Miller didn't just lose his job, he lost his ecosystem. The rumors I had planted, or rather, the truths I had allowed to surface, circulated through Portland's professional circles with ruthless efficiency. He was labeled not just as incompetent, but as toxic. The man who tried to humiliate a Volkov. The man who embezzled company funds to cheat on the boss's daughter. He was radioactive. Rebecca Sterling dropped him before he even got back to the Motel 6. I heard she posted a long, tearful video on social media claiming she was a victim of his manipulation, rebranding herself as a survivor of a narcissist. It was performative, but it effectively sealed Brandon's social coffin. Patricia was a different story. 3 days after the office confrontation, a package arrived at the Ritz-Carlton. It was a heavy box, wrapped in brown paper. I opened it to find a vintage tea set. It was Royal Albert, hand-painted, delicate, and beautiful. It was the one thing of hers I had admired once, years ago, when I first visited their house. There was a note. Elena asterisk. I always knew you had taste. I suppose I just didn't realize the scale of it. Brandon is a fool. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old woman who only wanted the best for her son, even if she was blind to what was right in front of her. Sincerely asterisk. Patricia. P.S. If you ever need a local liaison for your charity work, I have many connections. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the empty suite. The audacity was impressive. She was trying to pivot. She saw the new power structure and was trying to secure a foothold. I didn't reply. I instructed Victor to donate the tea set to the same women's shelter where my furniture had gone. Let someone who actually needed a touch of beauty have it. Patricia didn't deserve a response. Silence, I had learned, was the loudest rejection of all. As for Brandon, I saw him one last time, 6 months later. I was sitting in a cafe downtown, having a meeting with the city council regarding a new urban development project my foundation was funding. It was raining again. I looked out the window and saw a man walking briskly down the street. He was wearing a raincoat that looked a bit worn. He was carrying a briefcase that I recognized. It was the cheap faux leather one he had used when we first met, before I bought him the Italian leather one. He looked older. The arrogance was gone from his posture. He walked with his head down, focused on the pavement, dodging puddles. He stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes scanned the window of the cafe. I didn't duck, I didn't look away. I sipped my coffee and watched him. Our eyes met through the glass. I saw the recognition hit him. I saw the flinch. I saw the sudden, crushing weight of memory. He looked at me, the tailored suit, the impossible poise, the table full of important people listening to me, and then he looked at himself. He opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps to shout through the glass, but then the light changed. The crowd surged forward, pushing him along. He hesitated for 1 second, torn between the past and the reality, and then he turned his collar up and disappeared into the rain. He was just a face in the crowd, a stranger. Miss Volkov, the councilman asked, noticing my distraction, "Is everything all right?" I turned back to the table. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. "Yes," I said, "everything is perfect. I just saw a ghost, that's all, but he's gone now." I kept the engagement ring. Not to wear, obviously, and not out of sentimentality. I kept it in a small box in my safe deposit vault in Zurich. Every now and then, when I was negotiating a hostile takeover or dealing with a difficult board member, I would think about that ring. I would think about the woman who had worn it, the woman who had made herself small to fit into a small man's life, the woman who had apologized for her own existence. I kept the ring as a reminder, a memento mori for the girl I used to be. She was dead, that girl. Brandon and Patricia had killed her in that restaurant, but I was grateful to them. They had stripped away the softness, the naivety, the desperate need to please. They had cracked the shell so the creature inside could emerge. I finished my work in Portland a year after the breakup. The foundation was thriving. The pharmaceutical company was profitable under new management, and my name was whispered with fear and admiration in every boardroom in the city. On my last night, I hosted a private dinner for my closest friends, the ones who had stood by me when I was just Alina. Natalie was there, toasting with champagne, laughing about how she had known all along I was destined for greatness, even if she didn't know the extent of the bank account. We stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out over the city lights. "Do you ever miss it?" Natalie asked, leaning against the railing. "The simplicity, being anonymous." I thought about it. I thought about the casseroles, the budget spreadsheets, the nights watching TV with Brandon, trying to convince myself that his mediocrity was comfort. "No," I said, "I don't miss the cage, Natalie, even if it was comfortable." "So what's next?" she asked. "New York, London, Paris." "Tokyo," I said. "There is a technology firm there that requires restructuring, and the cherry blossoms are beautiful in the spring." "You're unstoppable," she shook her head. "I'm just getting started," I replied. I looked down at the city one last time. Somewhere down there, in a small apartment, Brandon Miller was probably telling a woman about his crazy ex-fiancée who ruined his life. He was probably spinning a new web of lies, trying to build a new castle out of sand. Let him talk, let him make noise. I had the silence, and in the silence I had found everything. I turned away from the railing and walked back inside, leaving the door open for the wind to blow through. The curtains danced in the breeze, waving goodbye to the past. I picked up my purse, checked my reflection in the mirror, impeccable, untouchable, sovereign, and walked out the door. The elevator took me down, dropping fast, but I didn't feel the fall. I only felt the rise. My phone buzzed, a text from Victor. The jet is fueled and ready, Miss Volkov. Wheels up in 40 minutes. I typed a reply, on my way. I stepped out into the night air. The rain had stopped. The stars were out. The world was wide and waiting. And I was finally, completely free.